show, we deal with many different types of tech projects. And we also deal with some not so tech projects. But on today's show, we're going to talk to Philip Levin, all the way from Haifa, Israel. Philip talks to me today about how he's taken apartment brewing to another level with his Internet of Things brewery. Today on Homebrewing DIY. Have you ever wanted to make a podcast? Do you have a subject you want to discuss with listeners? Do you even know where to start? Well, if you want to make a podcast and you want to get started now, I could not recommend Anchor enough. Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place for free, which you can use right from your phone or computer. Creation tools allow you to record and edit your podcast so it sounds great. They'll distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. And you can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Hey, look, I shopped around for a place to post my podcast, and Anchor was the easiest, most streamlined experience you could ask for. So if you're looking for a place for your new podcast, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Once again, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. And welcome back to Homebrewing DIY, the show that takes on the do-it-yourself aspect of homebrewing. Gadgets, contraptions, or parts? This podcast covers it all. On today's show, we're talking to Philip Levin, who locally in Israel, he travels to different homebrew shops and discusses his Internet of Things brewing style and how you can do it yourself. Please support the podcast. You can get access to our custom RSS feed with ad-free episodes and special bonus episodes. You get access to all that at the basic supporter level. Head on over to patreon.com/homebrewing DIY. Once again, that's Patreon at Homebrewing DIY, and give any amount. Your support keeps us on the air and helps this show improve. Hey, if money's not the way you want to support the show, you can always head over to Apple Podcasts or on Stitcher and review us. Your reviews help other homebrewers find this show. Here's a quick word from our sponsor, Brewfather. Brewfather is a very powerful brewing software. Brewfather is sleek and well designed, and it has a great free version so you can try it out. If you're new to homebrewing, or you just want to try something new, you need to try this powerful brewing software. Brewfather gives you everything you need to build your recipes or get through a brew day. Head on over to homebrewingdiy.beer and click on the Brewfather banner to get started today. Your feedback is always encouraged. You can send feedback to podcast@homebrewingdiy.beer. A quick email, and you can tell us what you think of the show or ask any question. We'd love to hear from you, and we're also on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Just look for the handle @homebrewingdiy. Once again, look for the handle @homebrewingdiy. Now let's dive into our show and talk to Philip Levin about his Internet of Things brewing today on Homebrewing DIY. I'm sitting here with Philip Levin from Haifa, Israel, and we're going to talk about his Internet of Things brew setup and generally how he started. So welcome to Homebrewing DIY.
Thanks for having me.
Let's just start with how you found homebrewing and how you began brewing.
Yes, of course. So actually, I think my story started as everyone's. Like I got a gift for my wedding, the homebrew kit, like the basic one with the white buckets and the partial mash kit. I don't remember what it was, but I remember brewing it. It was so much fun, and I was brewing like from kits for several years, like 3 years in a row, and then suddenly I started to get inside this hobby and learn more and build a bigger setup. Went to all grain brewing and etc. etc. But the beginning was classical, like homebrew kit.
Yeah, I think if we talk to most homebrewers, they're going to say, "Hey, I started with extract, and take the steeping grains, you put them in the pot, boil, add some hops to it, and really, when we look at that style of brewing, you're learning how to ferment, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really what you get out of it. And then, what did your first all grain setup look like?
Um, I went to I went to my local homebrew shop and I started to talk with the guy, like different methods, and he's more into free vessel systems. And I knew that at the time I was renting a small apartment and I don't have a place for free system, free vessel system. So I had to make something smaller, and I decided to go on the brew in a bag method, which actually was pretty good for that time. And I still stick with this method. I'm not having free vessel system. It's always brew in a bag. So this was the first one, and then I had expanded this system that I have now, and I built some small breweries as well, just for small batches.
Okay, and I've actually seen some images of your current brewery on things like Instagram, and you're still in a pretty small space, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Actually, at this apartment, I have bigger space, but the brewing's area itself is like small corridor next to the kitchen. It's like a small corner. Yeah, it's really small.
That's awesome. One of the things that I always hear from people, whether it be online or my friends or just people who maybe tell me things like, "Oh, hey, I really want to brew and I'd love to brew all grain or something like that, but I don't really have the room." Right? That's a really common thing. I got to admit, just from looking at some of your pictures, you kind of buck that system. You're in a small space. Yes, you're an electric brewery right now, but the idea is that small space is something that kind of really bucks that system when people tell you that, hey, I don't have space.
Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So what would you when you decided to get into that Internet of Things type of brewing? What prompted you, and how did you start, and what was your kind of first project?
Yeah, so actually it started like small steps, but right from the beginning, I knew that I'm going to make it like a big in an IoT way. So it started actually from the local homebrew shop. I went to the store manager, and he had a course there that he taught some people how to brew, and he was using this small electric controller with small display. And then he asked me, "Do you think it's possible to project the temperature readings to another bigger display?" Uh, and I said, "I don't know. It's pretty simple controller, but we can try. Let me Google that for you." And I went to Google, and then I found a huge community of DIY IoT brewers that doing stuff brewing related. So after a couple hours, I knew that I'm going to make my breweries a smart one, connected to the internet, and to have digital readings and to partial automation and stuff like that.
So, what was your first like DIY project? Was it going full bore onto your brewery? Was it like a fermentation controller? Or what was kind of that
Yeah.
first thing?
Actually, I started from I found on GitHub. I found a project that you actually flash existing controller like STC 1000, and you take a Arduino and you like like rewrite the program, and it's more into brewing way, because you can define different programs for different brews, like for lagers, for ales, for kolsch, for wheat beers, different fermentation profiles, and you can pre-program it, and then like you flash the program to the controller, and then you have like a brewing controller dedicated.
Okay, so the STC 1000, for people that don't know, is kind of the precursor to the modern Inkbird. I don't know if you know what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the STC 1000 actually is exactly the temperature controller I use to run my kegerator. So it's but I know what you're talking about. It was I think probably around 2014 or 2015 when people were really doing that. They had that special model of STC 1000 that could be flashed, right? And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I'd actually never seen anyone do it to actually control a brewery. I'd only seen it for fermentation control. Explain to me a bit how that worked.
Well, you have at that project you can define if you want to control your fermentation or if you want to control your brewing system, like the kettle itself. Uh, Basically, it's just a matter of or counting hours or counting seconds. So you can, if you want to control the fermentation, so you just define it by the hours, and then you have like long days, and the brewery and the fermentation controller keeps the temperature at the required scale. And if you want to brew with it, so you just like saying, okay, I want to keep the mesh temperature for 67 Celsius. It's Fahrenheit. It's yeah, you do the math, and yeah, and and basically it can be the same. And by the way, when you have like hop additions, it buzzer. It has a small buzzer, so it just tells you like, now it's the hop additions. So
Okay.
this was my first project, and actually it was the simplest one.
Yeah, of
It's really
course. It,
easy.
it it starts simple and easy there, right? And then moves on to more complicated. What was your next project? Was it kind of getting more advanced with your brewery?
Well, at that time, I was doing things parallel. I was improving current projects that I already built, and I'm started to plan the expansion of the brewery. Basically, I started going to Raspberry Pi and Craft Beer Pi, which is a open source program platform that it can monitor brewing process and can monitor fermentation process. So I start to plan and go into it, and there is a Facebook group about it. It's really amazing, super talented people that do using this program. And I started to build my small controller, Raspberry Pi controller, and after that, I started to expand. First I was it was brewing controller, and then it became a fermentation controller itself, besides the brewing.
Okay, so you moved from the STC 1000 brewery controller that you had built, and then moved into the Raspberry Pi and the Craft Beer Pi, which is a brewery controller, basically using the GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi to basically control relays. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the first step.
Yep. And then from there, you're kind of running your brewery from that, and then eventually that same setup moved into your fermentation as well, correct?
Yes, exactly. But after a while, I realized that it's too much wires because each GPIO they need to be connected to a different relay, and it's too much wires for me. And I decided to look for another solution. I want to make it wireless, not the brewing gear, but the fermentation. I wanted to be separated because my fermentation is located in another room, not on the one that I brew. So I had to have a way to control the fermentation wireless. So I started to look for it, and I tried to even program some stuff to use Arduino to to send signals wireless or a radio frequency a controller, but it wasn't like I wasn't so uh, finish this project, and then I realized that I can use something much more simpler, like MQTT protocol, and to use wireless switches. And it was like after I realized that I can do it much more easier, so I bought just Sonoff switches and start to flash them because they come with like the Chinese software. You need to erase it and in order to connect it to craft beer pie using MQTT protocol.
That's awesome, and to be honest, that's a different setup than most people I see with. Normally, it's kind of like yes, this like Franken wired thing where it's like I have a fermentation chamber and it's all wired into the same box, and then the brewery controller is all wired into the same box, and they kind of all need to be near each other. This way, using MQTT, which for those who don't know, is basically a wireless technology that you can basically run on the Raspberry Pi that basically allows you to send on and off commands or just different commands through an internal network protocol that allows the receiving end of that to basically do a relay. You see it a lot in home automation setups. So example would be, let's say I'm going to use a Raspberry Pi with OpenHab to like turn my lights on and off in my house. You see MQTT really setting those types of systems up. And really you've taken that and applied it to your fermentation controller and then still have the controlled by the craft beer pie setup. So really that's a really cool setup and a great way to work around it.
Yeah, and besides turning on and off the fermentation chamber, it can send you temperature readings from the Sonoff as well. Basically, you can hook up many sensors to the Sonoff device, and just like in the Crappy Pi, you need to write the exact parameters that you want to get from it. It can measure humidity, it can measure light, whatever. Like basically any sensor that hook up to that Sonoff, you can get the readings from it.
That's awesome. And then basically, walk me through real quickly if you were to brew a beer, let's say tomorrow, and you were gonna brew a beer tomorrow. What would walk me through the process of like what a batch looks like for you, all the way like let's start with like milling the grain. You're gonna start brewing your beer, and then like let's get to where we're gonna be putting into a keg or in the bottle. So, what does that look like?
So milling the grain is it's I think it's the old-fashioned way. I just hook up my drill and I mill the grains. I try to do it or during the day or like because I brew really early in the morning because my son and my wife still sleeping, so I don't want to make a lot of noise. So I I mill the grain before, and then I just a day before I connect all the system, fill the water, and turn on the computer and tell him start to heat the mash for mash temperature, like five in the morning, because at 6 I want to throw the grains inside, and then I press OK and it start counting. But in the morning I just throw the grains inside and take my kid to the kindergarten because the brewery is automated, so it keeps the temperature and basically I have like about an hour, maybe more, to do my stuff like household stuff, and then I go take out the grains. I have like a couple minutes that I need to prepare the hops or whatever, and then I like start to boil. I can hook up my hop dropper. You can see on my Instagram account I built a hop dropper that receiving commands from Raspberry Pi when you need to add the hops additions, and it just throw the hops additions at the time, like by the recipe itself. Um, so I have like spare time during the boil as well. You need to like I know my system. I don't have boil overs, but you need to be aware that if it's automated, but still physics, it's physics. So sometimes it can be
Is
boil
what it
overs.
is. Like
Yeah,
the day you don't look is the day it boils over, right?
yeah, exactly.
I want to talk about this hop dropper a bit.
Yeah.
I actually haven't seen that on your Instagram, so I'm curious of what that like looks like. Is that controlled through the craft beer pie? Like, there's a module built into that kind of automates that hot dropper that you built.
Yeah, actually, I saw similar things on YouTube. Like some people made very like I can say bulky designs of the hop dropper, and I saw the possibility that you can like the advantages of automated hop dropper, but it was too bulky for me, so I decided to think about the form factor of it. And I started to Google and I found a very nice approach by Brewboss, I think. I think it's yeah, American guy. He has like this also electronic brewery, so he had some kind of a hop dropper. Basically, it's a motor that spins when it receives commands, and like you empty the hops into the boiling kettle. So I decided to go in this direction, and I built this tray with pipes, tubes, and that you can fill the hops into the tubes, and then it spins. And when the tube is above the hole, it just throws the hops to the kettle. So I'm
That
not using it regularly because sometimes I brew like one edition, so I can just throw the hop edition at the beginning when I'm next to the kettle and go to do my stuff. But yeah, it's and this project was like actually it was from scratch because I had to make the program itself. So I asked the guys from the community of the craft beer pie to write something, and actually the main creator of the craft beer pie, he was like saw this. Oh yeah, it's pretty easy, and he just like 10 minutes he wrote something, and it's there. And another guy from Brazil took my form of design and made it a bit more advanced, and he put Arduino inside, so it was more smart hop dropper rather than the vision that I had. But for my needs, I'm pretty happy with the results.
that sounds super cool. I'm gonna actually for listeners, I'm definitely gonna track down this brew boss and link to his hop dropper, and obviously we're gonna link to your Instagram so that people can dig in and check it out. But that's a really cool project that I've never heard of, and I'm excited to really get in and check it out. So
Sure.
yeah, you're adding hops to your beer. Let's keep going.
Yeah, so after the like basically I have a buzzer that if I'm not next to the kettle and it needs my attention, so the buzzer is go like it's a siren and it calls me or it pushes notification to my smartwatch or my phone what like the state of the brewing, and when I need to finish, I just arrive, hook up the chiller and start to chill the wort into the fermenter, and then pretty much the brew day is done. I take the fermentation, like the fermenter, put it in the fermentation chamber. In my case, it's a fridge, but I have other fermentation chambers as well. So I just put it there, hook up to the, like in the craft beer pie, I just start the fermentation checkbox and it's going, like adding yeast. Sometimes I use my airlock, like Plato airlock. Do you familiar with it?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Play-Doh airlock. That's the one that basically takes the amount of bubbles and uses that as like, I guess, basically the viability of the yeast and where it is in fermentation. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, I'm not a friend, but I'm familiar with the guys that started this project, and basically they come they come from the field of chemistry, so they know that each sugar molecule can like divide it into alcohol and CO2. So they knew that if you have like OG of, I don't know, 1050, so at the end you should have like 6 feet of square feet of CO2. So that's the way that they use, like they measure the volume of the CO2 in order to calculate the ABV.
Okay.
So actually, I found it's a really nice tool to understand the variability of your yeast. Not like it can be accurate in terms of ABV, but I'm more into understand if I have a healthy colony of yeast, and using this graph that I get from the airlock, I can understand like what is the temperature, like what is the temp of the tempo of the fermentation, which is really crucial parameter when you think about it. Like, are my yeast are vital? Are they healthy? Especially if you're using a liquid yeast.
Yes, that becomes really important if you, especially at some points through my brewing career, I've used to have a bit of a yeast bank, and I would start with like a 10 mil little thing of wort and build from there all the way up to an entire 2-liter starter. And the viability becomes really important when you're talking with like, hey, I got a single colony of yeast and I'm going all the way up to a full-on yeast starter. It becomes super duper important. And liquid yeast, also the age of a liquid yeast can really affect the viability as well. I'm in the States, obviously. I'm not sure, other than probably Fermentis, what brands of liquid yeast you get in Israel. But if it's stuff that's coming from here, for example, if you're getting White Labs, chances are it's probably not as fresh as you would get like being in San Diego or something like that.
Yeah, actually, it's one of the problems that in Israel that we don't have regular supply of liquid yeast. So once a year, somebody like bring one of the local homebrew shops bring a batch. It's not everything, like really a limited amount. And the people that going abroad, like bringing liquid yeast in their suitcases, we just switch vials and reuse liquid yeast. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that's not going to give you the freshest yeast throwing it in your pack and having it warm for like 4 days, right? So, that would, the viability of yeast becomes super important, specifically when you're wanting a beer to take off like quickly, right? So, like, for example, I pitch my yeast, and if I've made a really big starter or I have enough cells and it's really a viable yeast colony, you're going to get fermentation like in 6 hours, less than 12 hours for sure. When you have a kind of slow to get going batch, and this actually has happened to me in my brewing career, where I had a colony of yeast that I'd used over and over and over and over again, and I think it was about 7 generations deep, and then it just changed and didn't do well and was sluggish and actually made my beer taste like crap. So it is something where I think specifically in your use case, the viability of yeast seems very, very important. And I'm glad the Plato can do something like that, because to be honest, it's not a device that I've personally used. I have a tilt hydrometer, and I'm in the process of building an ice spindle. But it's the Plato's not something I've really played with, but everybody that's used it has had really great things to say about it.
Yeah, actually, I use sometimes parallel ice spindle and the Plato airlock, because I think they give you different stats, and when you see the stats from the two devices, you get the bigger, wider picture about your fermentation process, the tempo of the fermentation, and the yeast, like the health of the yeast. So it's really like mind blowing how two different devices can give you a wider picture of what's happening there.
Awesome. And then let's go into so you're finished with fermenting. Do you bottle? Do you keg? What's how do you actually package your beer?
Yeah, actually, I keg my beer. Most of my beer I put in kegs. I play with sours as well, but I don't want to ruin my kegs, like to make the tap sour. So I bottle my sour beer and keg the regular beer.
Awesome. And then when it comes to like your serving, do you have? I personally have like the brew board. I actually run a Raspberry Pints. Do you have something similar?
Yeah, I have Raspberry Pis as well. I tried to hook up the flow meters, but I saw the price tag of the flow meters and I thought at that time that it's going to be endless project because I read reviews that people really have problems with the flow meter. So I just decided to leave the board just with the names, like the ABV, whatever, what the stats that you show there. And actually now I started to use another product by Play-Doh, the keg monitor. They ran a Kickstarter campaign, I think in the summer, like 2 months ago, and I got a prototype version of it. It's not really like the prototype version is a bit. It's not waterproof because and in my kegerator I have really humid environment, so I need to like to use it really carefully. But it's really good device that you can monitor the like your kegs.
Yeah, and that uses weight. Is that right?
Yes, it's I think it's a free weight loads and just it hooks up to the cloud and sends the information back to your device. And now actually I started to work with on a tap handle that's going to use the API by Plato and to show the stats on the tap itself, like on the handle itself.
Oh, so like you would have like a handle with a screen, and it would upload the data
Yeah,
into it.
yeah, I want to use a e-paper like the one that you have on Kindle, so it's really power efficient. So you can like use one charge for like I don't know endless time.
Yeah, that's
Every time like you move you tilt the tap handle, it just sends an API request and it gets back the information and just stay there. So this is my plans. I just it's just like things that I started 2 weeks ago. They told me that they're going to give me access to the API, so I hope this project will be successful. Like I don't know, maybe in a month or two or so.
that's actually a really cool project, and I can't wait to see when you build it. Like that's gonna be really cool. Uh, so my next question is other than that project, do you have any other projects you're working on that have to do with your kind of Internet of Things brewery?
Um, Actually, I started to work with a friend on a project that we will try to get real-time readings during the brewing process. We we want to use pressure sensors in two different places in the kettle itself, and with the calculation of pressure and volume of the like we know what the volume of the wort, so we can theoretically get the real-time gravity readings during the boil. So my vision is to have a autocorrect mode when the computer can correct your brewing process. If you have too much gravity, you can add a little bit water to be precise of the recipe. Or if you have like too much water and you below uh, your original gravity, so it just like continue to boil until the gravity gets to the required point.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah,
That's
but at
awesome.
the time we checking the possibility because we have like physics. It's beyond us. We need to.
Yes, that is a lot of math, and but I mean that's a really exciting approach. Be able to kind of you like a pressure sensor can tell you the volume of the liquid that's sitting in there, right? And so the idea is that if you know that volume, and really if you can just figure out a way to figure out how much sugar's in solution, that's kind of a cool idea to be able to make adjustments. Though hypothetically thinking in my mind, there would need to be some sort of algorithm that would make that change, right, automatically. So that seems like quite a big project, but that is super exciting, because I think if you figure it out, you're going to blow a lot of people's mind.
Yeah.
Super cool. What are you brewing these days? Well, like, what was the last thing you brewed?
Actually, I brewed 3 or 4 days ago. I brewed a saison, like a clone of a Phantom saison, which is a really good beer that I had like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and I just harvested the yeast from the bottle, and I grew up the yeast, and I just made improvisation on this commercial brewery recipe. So it's going to be the yeast from the brewery, but not the recipe, because I don't know the recipe. So I just improvised something that I already made a saison, and I just made small adjustments to be closer to the AB that they wrote on the bottle.
Awesome. And when's that going to be ready?
Well, I think it will. I'll start. I'm going to bottle this because it's a mixed culture of Saccharomyces and Brettanomyces, which are going to be a bit funky. So the vital state of the Brettanomyces, it's about 5 to 6 months from now. So I think I'll start to taste the bottles like around January, February.
That's awesome. I kind of wish I could be around to taste that beer. But you're a world away, so
Yeah.
I'm here in the middle of night in Denver, Colorado, and it's definitely morning where you are. So, yeah, I I know that you go around to a lot of like brew shops locally, and you kind of have a deck that you use to kind of share with other brewers and let them know like the kind of brewery that you've built and that it's accessible to others, right? Because a lot of the projects you're using are obviously open source projects. They're not money when it comes to the software. It's really just kind of building the hardware and tweaking it to your liking. What are do you see more of kind of sharing and evangelizing those types of things in the future?
Yes, of course. I think I decided this summer, like during the summer break, I decided to go to tell people about my journey into IoT and how it wasn't so hard as it seems to be. And you can start in small steps, and you can stop whatever you like. You don't have to build a super huge smart brewery. You can just made some small steps in to make your brew day enjoyable. So yeah, I will continue in my process of building this. It's a project for me, but I advise people to try to see what they like, maybe just to find something that they can find in their brewery. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're to be honest, you have a great Instagram account that people follow and kind of can see your brew journey. What's the name on your Instagram account? So if somebody's listening and they wanted to follow you.
Yeah, so it's Philusha. It's Philusha 1983. Yeah, so this is my Instagram account. I think like 2 years ago I started to just take photos of my brew career, and before that I have like family photos and dog photos and whatever. But yeah, for the last 3 years it's only brew related stuff.
Awesome. So yeah, if this is something you're listening to this show and you really want to check out this kind of brewery that Philip has put together, go and check out his Instagram. It's really cool. And to be honest, it's something where I was super duper impressed with the photos and kind of seeing you in brew shops, giving presentations. He did send me the deck he uses and the slideshows, and it really is a good explainer to somebody who is kind of saying, hey, I want to get into this, and yeah, like you said, I want to get into it, and I can stop where I want. It's not something that should be overwhelming. Personally, my brew in a bag is still a propane tank I use on my back porch, and none of it is automated at all. But then once I get into fermentation and my kegerator and things like that, that's where my automation kicks in, right? I actually haven't made the step of the mash and that kind of part for my personal journey. Is it in the horizon for me? Probably. It's definitely probably something I'm going to do, and in the future. My problem is that in the States, our power is only 110, and so I have to actually get a 220 run into my garage so I can electric brew and all that stuff. I think you guys are probably just out your outlet is probably 240, right?
Yeah. It's easier for us.
Yeah, it's easy to boil a lot of liquid when you have 240. So, So other than that, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It was really great to talk to you, Philip. And if you want to send me over the recipe of the saison that you just made, that would be great. I'd love to add that to the show notes so that anybody who would like to make it themselves, they could try. And then as far as the I also link straight to your Instagram account from my show notes as well, so that people can follow you. And Philip's a super nice guy. If you want to reach out to him, I'm sure he'll send you over his Internet of Things deck. He sent it to me quite easily. So
you can share it with the audience.
Yeah, awesome. So I'll actually put a link to that on the show notes so that if anybody wants to look at it. Other than that, well, thank you very much for being on the podcast, and I really look forward to seeing some of your future projects.
Thanks for having me.
I would like to thank Philip for taking the time to be on the show. And if you want to check out his Internet of Things slideshow, check out the Instagram account. Just head on over to homebrewingdiy.beer for detailed show notes. Once again, we move monthly support to Patreon, so you can support the podcast at patreon.com/homebrewingdiy. Your monthly support will help keep this show on the air. Last, if you'd like to give us feedback, you can email us at podcast@homebrewingdiy.beer. Well, that's the end of today's show, and we'll see you next week on Homebrewing DIY.